Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and so this came to my attention today, and yeah, so what we're gonna go through and well, here's the story for this. So the story behind this post is quite simple. Asus released controversial marketing slides that releases controversial marketing slides for their X570 motherboard series, where they claim MSI and Gigabyte boards are lacking in a few aspects. Obviously, this has been met with complaints from the two, who asked AMD to take care of it. AMD then reached out to Asus and suggested that these slides should disappear from the internet, and that's how they ended up on video cards. Let's get into the marketing slides, and I'll just sort of share my opinions on them. And yeah, basically this is like Buildzoid reacts to Asus marketing. Anyway, so let's start going through this. So, first comparison we get is the Tough Gaming X570 Plus against the Gaming Edge Wi-Fi. So, ignoring all of the thing is, I'm actually not that interested in reading the marketing things that Asus has to say, which I've kind of started to realize is a major issue because I already have opinions about these motherboards, and I ultimately think the Tough Gaming X570 Plus is better than the Gaming Edge Wi-Fi. You know what other board is better than the Gaming Edge Wi-Fi? The X570 Elite from Gigabyte. And notice how that board isn't present on this slide right here, because Gigabyte basically matches the spec that Asus has here. So yeah, except I think for the memory. Though the funny thing is the memory spec right here is completely irrelevant, because on Ryzen you really don't want to be running above if you have a really good Ryzen 3rd gen, if you have a good chip, its FCLK will max out at 1900 megahertz, and in which case you're going to want to run a maximum of like 3800 megahertz memory clock with as tight timings as possible. That's optimal for your performance. So frequencies in excess of 3800 megahertz are basically completely irrelevant and useless marketing wank. So that's kind of that. PCB layer count. Honestly, I don't care about layer counts, because you can make a really bad board with a lot of layers, and you can make a really good board with very few. Okay, having more layers makes making a good board easier, but it doesn't inherently make the board better. You'd still need to you don't just add a layer to the board and get some magical performance improvement from doing that. No, you need to actually make use of the layer in some way. So 6 layers versus 4 is just like that. Ultimately, I think that's probably where Asus is getting the slightly better memory frequency from. But ultimately, it's not something I would worry about as an end user. Is just whatever. How you get to the end result of good memory overclocking, I couldn't care less about. That the memory overclocking is good, that's what I do care about, right? That kind of approach that. Anyway, so apparently it has also better Wi-Fi, and it has a DisplayPort and HDMI instead of just HDMI. Sure, whatever. Somebody's totally going to stick an APU into a $200 X570 motherboard, because that's a really reasonable, purchasing decision right there. It isn't. That's what I'm getting at. Anyway, yeah, the VRM on the Tough Gaming should absolutely smash the VRM on the Gaming Edge. And yeah, especially if they're testing with a 16 core. Though at 3.2 gigahertz, that seems suspiciously high for only 3.2 gigahertz. Now, the thing is, this 16 core that we see in all of these marketing slides from Asus is an engineering sample 16 core. The engineering sample 16 cores that all of the board vendors have are crap. They're complete garbage chips. They barely go above 4 gigahertz. So all of the frequencies you'll be seeing here are going to be really, really low. As soon any overclocking Asus is going to be advertising with the 16 core is going to be really, really low, because the 16 core they have sucks. So just kind of keep that in mind, and it arguably makes some of the differences more drastic than they should be. Anyway, so yeah, the VRM thermal testing is just the Tough Gaming should win that, because the VRM is just better on it. But at the same time, I have a hard time believing any kind of test results from a motherboard's market from any board vendor when it comes to testing their competitors' motherboards. Because let's just put it this way: I recently went to Taiwan. I already had and I had a bit of an experience with this, where it's I tested 2 boards from different board vendors. And my results did not match the results that I was supposed that I think I was supposed to get at with the Yeah, this is the thing. This is a really awkward topic for me to talk about. Basically, I don't trust board vendors to test their competitors' boards because they will do everything in their power to like rig the testing in a way that is unfair for their competitor. So they will test the one scenario where they have an advantage or like basically do that kind of thing. And it's just like, and that makes their test results kind of irrelevant. Either way, the Tough Gaming should have better VRM thermals than the Gaming Edge Wi-Fi just because this VRM is better. But I wouldn't take Asus, like Asus marketing department, I would not take their word for it. Even if they're like, I'd like if they're not making like the thing is I still expect the board to win. I'm just surprised that for such a low clock speed there's such a massive temperature difference. Like this VRM up until about this VRM should be fine up until about like 100 no, even 125 amps. It shouldn't be hitting that kind of temperature. Yeah, like it really shouldn't be hitting that temperature. So this test looks wrong because I've tested motherboards with a worse version of this same voltage regulator and they ran cooler on 125 amp loads. And for 3.2 gigahertz, unless they're smashing voltage into that voltage regulator, this isn't like you wouldn't be getting these kinds of temperatures at 3.2. Like they're doing a test that's really weird here because that temperature is way too high and this one might be a bit low. So yeah, I like still the Tough Gaming should win, but not necessarily by this much. Like that's what, like 65 degrees versus 105 degrees. Yeah, like oh, because you can't see the inductors in here. You can. Okay, well that explains a lot, doesn't it? So yeah, because the highest temperature you're seeing on there is like 68, and that's actually by the CPU, and they have like 70 up there. So yeah, like I doubt if you actually tested this in a proper, not motherboard marketing department style test, you wouldn't get a 35-degree advantage for the Asus board. Not at this frequency at least. Like I don't know what they're doing with the voltage. Maybe they're running like stupid amounts of volts for that, but yeah. Anyway, next we have PCB layer matters. No, they don't. Your VRM is more efficient, noob. Like, this is the funny thing is like, okay, so extra PCB layers will make the PCB a better heatsink. However, if your VRM is already significantly more efficient than your competitors, this temperature difference right here, especially when it's based on the comparison of the PCB's hottest spot, is literally just a VRM efficiency test. Well, it's basically a VRM plus VRM heatsink effectiveness, like VRM efficiency plus heatsink effectiveness test, not a PCB layer count test. I bet you if you smashed a freaking water block on the VRM of that MSI board, it would end up cooler than the Asus board because layers don't matter. It's about how much heat your VRM produces and how much of a heatsink you have on top of that VRM. Layers matter if you're trying to deal like PCB layers matter for other things, not for cooling. Like, yes, they can make your PCB run cooler if you have the exact same heatsink and the exact same VRM, and one configuration has, 2 layers more. Yeah, the 2 layers extra will actually help the identical configuration. But when you're comparing completely different VRM heatsinks, completely different VRMs, the layer count is not what's making the difference here. It's the VRMs and the heatsinks. So this is a stupid slide and shouldn't exist. This is pointless. This is a completely stupid comparison to make. Next, we have great OC capability. So again, this is because they're running a 16-core engineering sample CPUs. 3.9 gigahertz is actually quite an achievement for those chips. But the thing is I'm 100% certain that MSI board is just thermal throttling on the VRM. And again, I don't trust Asus marketing to give the board a fair chance. Okay, they're probably doing something intentionally configuring the board in such a way that it has an extremely hard time running that CPU, more so than if you actually did it properly. Because 3.2 gigahertz, like, it should not be hitting... Like here they do a 3.2 gigahertz test and they're hitting 105 degrees. Like they are doing something really wrong with that board because it should not be hitting that temperature at that kind of frequency. Because the chip shouldn't be like even as bad as the engineering samples are. Wait a minute. I wonder what maybe the test is that they have the same voltage on both of the boards, so it's like 1.35 volts or whatever, right, on the TUF, and 1.35 volts on the MSI. And obviously the MSI board just can't handle that much voltage. So they're like, oh yeah, you need to drop the frequency all the way down to 3.2 gigahertz to offset the excess voltage. If you actually used a reasonable voltage, that MSI board might actually clock a bit higher. That's the only way I can see this test actually working out this way, is if they're smashing voltage into that 16 core to the point that the MSI board can't deal with it. Because otherwise, that board should, like, 3.2 gigahertz should not be the limit for that board at all. Like, I'm pretty sure you could get an X470 Gaming Plus to do more than 3.2 gigahertz, even with the engineering sample 16 cores. Like, they're bad, but they're not that bad. Okay, like, especially, like, they have a low frequency ceiling. It's not like they need stupid amounts of voltage for reasonable, like, more reasonable frequencies. So anyway, this test right here is stupid. Next test. Oh, next comparison. So here we have another comparison. So fun fact, you know, Asus marketing is obviously going like, oh, we got 6 layers. Great. Totally irrelevant. Doesn't really matter in any way, shape, or form to the end user as far as I'm concerned. What else do we have? M.2 slots. This has 2. Or 2 110. What? Am I 22 110, right? That's the length standard, right? If like I don't pay attention to M.2 SSDs, so somebody's going to have to correct me about this, but if I'm reading this correctly, the Gigabyte board has 2 like, cuz that's a 280. Yeah, that's a short slot and that's a long slot. And Gigabyte has 2 long slots. So your board is worse. Yeah. Your board is the same as the MSI board, and this has 2 full length, whereas this has, like, the 1 reduced. Yeah, so, like, yeah, this is stupid, isn't it? Because I'm not sure about the 3.0 claim there, but definitely the Gigabyte board just has better M.2 support than this does. VRM-wise, this wins. The voltage regulator on this motherboard is better than the voltage regulator on either of these, but if you care about M.2 slots, Gigabyte has like a better configuration. The Gigabyte board also has BIOS flashback, so if you brick your BIOS, you can actually fix it, whereas you can't do that on the Asus board because it doesn't have that feature. I think Gigabyte's audio section, well, I'm actually not sure. I think MSI's audio section might be the best out of these. Memory clock, I think just Gigabyte doesn't care about testing high frequency on this board. Like, honestly, if you look at Gigabyte's QVLs, the Master currently has a bigger, better QVL than the Extreme because the Master is like the focus board for Gigabyte. That's the board they really care about. And I guess with the Gaming X, they were like, well, it does 4,000 and we can't really be bothered testing higher than that. Because the thing is like, one thing to keep in mind is Asus is a lot bigger than a lot of the other board vendors. So a lot of the time, it's just like Asus can afford to do things that the others can't. Anyway, so yeah, so Gigabyte has better M.2 support here. Yeah, so this comparison, like, if you care about features, the Gaming X has more. If you care about VRM, the Dash P has more, right? That's kind of that. That's what we're getting here. Anyway, next we get some overclocking stuff. I still don't trust... Wait, how did the... I still don't trust Asus overclocking testing. 3.1. No, like, just no. Unless the chip they're doing these overclocks with is like even worse than the one I had the pleasure of working with when I was at Gigabyte HQ. So this right here, no. Again, just pointless chart. Then we have a VRM comparison. Crowded layout. This isn't a completely irrelevant point. This right here, crowded layout. Who cares? That's not a real point. Crowded layout, like, no, that's not a real thing. Worse thermals? Yes. Worse thermals? Yes, sure. This does run cooler. But the layout, if anything, I'd say MSI should have stuck more MOSFETs in their VRM. That would have given them better thermal performance. And Gigabyte should have, well, potentially should have gone for more as well, but I'd say Gigabyte should have just gone for better MOSFETs at this point, because they're kind of running out of space when you start putting them on the back of the board. It doesn't matter that they're on the back of the board, right? But they could be better. Like, the crowded layout is like, I don't know why that's a comparison point. Like, who cares? Like, it's the back of, you don't even see them. They're on the back of the board. The main concern there is just cooling them since they're on the back of the board, right? That's the concern with them. It's not that there's not enough space. Like, that's for the board designers to worry about, not for the end user. It's like, oh, I'm running out of space for my voltage regulator. That's a concern if you're designing the board, not when you're buying it, right? Like, because when you buy the board, you get whatever is listed in the specs. So, yeah, anyway, this VRM is better. But I'd also say if you're buying one of these bottom-of-the-barrel X570 boards, you're probably not looking to run a 16-core in them, right? So in which case, you might want to buy a board with better features rather than a board with a better VRM. And in that department, I think the Gaming X kind of takes the lead, as Asus unintentionally demonstrates right here with the better M.2 support. Also, like, they don't talk about Q-Flash, BIOS flashback functionality, because I'm pretty sure, like, I'm not sure that MSI has it, but Gigabyte definitely has it on this board. And I know for a fact that Asus doesn't, because they reserved BIOS flashback functionality for only the like $300 Strix F and higher, because, Asus price, like, because, they need to cut, micromanage all of the features to force you to spend as much money as possible when buying an Asus motherboard. Which these marketing slides reflect that as well. So, yeah, anyway, now we get some VRM thermal comparisons. Yeah, the Asus board wins. Then we have something about, thanks to 12DR, blah, 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 efficient heatsink design, while other brands, yeah, but that's mostly because of the VRM. Yeah, so this is basically just Asus's VRM is more efficient. So ultimately, when you put a heatsink on it, it still runs cooler than the competition. Big surprise, right? Anyway, if we keep moving down, we have PCB layers matter. No, they don't. This is, again, just a VRM thermal comparison, because in the side notes, the comparison of the PCB's hottest spot. I wonder what's going to be the hottest. Maybe the VRM that's, like, significantly less efficient than the Asus one. So, yeah, this right here, basically we have 3 slides of how Asus VRM is efficient, except marketed in different ways. Here we have Asus VRM is more efficient. Here we have Asus heatsink is more effective. And here we have PCB is more effective. When it's really all just our VRM is better. We could have gotten over this with 1 slide instead of 3. But, then we wouldn't have marketing wank for days. And so somebody probably gets paid for making these. So, they need to put a lot of time and effort in coming up with all the different ways that they win, when it's really just one way. You just have a better VRM, which in my opinion, like, if they just, like, that's fair. You have a better VRM. Great. That's nice you can talk about that, but you don't need to tell us 3 different, like, this right here is just irrelevant. Like, yeah, PCB layers make your VRM run cooler, but that's only applicable if you're looking at the same damn voltage regulator, which you aren't. Anyway, next we get to this right here, which, hey, look, they're spending money on reinforcing PCIe 1X slots. I've never heard of somebody ripping out a 1X. I have heard of people ripping out 16X slots, and I've heard of a couple people ripping out memory slots, but you can't rip out a PCIe 1X because a 1X doesn't have a latch. So if you pull on the card in a 1X slot, it'll just come out. Like, it will never take the slot with it. So I don't know why this right here, this bottom comparison, pointless as far as I'm concerned. The DRAM slot reinforcement, again, like, I honestly think reinforcing any kind of slots is mostly about PCIe slots, because I have seen, it used to be pretty frequent for me to see people rip out, like they'd rip out their GPU and they'd take the PCIe slot with it. That's pretty common. But memory, that's rather rare. And 1X slots, I've literally never heard of that happening. So this is a pointless comparison as far as I'm concerned. But sure, whatever. It does cost more money. So Asus solid. So this comparison right here is pointless because a single 8-pin on the MSI motherboard is already more powerful than the VRM on that MSI motherboard. So you don't need an extra power connector. Gigabyte is the only ones where it's just like, okay, we have a solid pin power connector, which I think is mostly because Gigabyte just has piles of those, more so than, like, well, I'm not sure. I guess they're kind of marketing it as well. They considered it a marketing point, but still, like, this single 8-pin is, again, more powerful than the VRM on the board. Like, basically, as far as I'm concerned with power connectors, it's just like, if your VRM will overheat before the power connector does, you have too many power connectors already, okay? And for both the MSI and the Gigabyte board, this is true. And actually for the Asus board as well. If you actually needed an 8+4 pin, like, this is good enough for X299 in terms of power connector configuration. You know what isn't good enough for X299? This VRM. Not good enough for X299. So Asus is just wasting board space with an extra power connector. And you know, MSI is kind of too. But anyway, let's move on. So now we get into the ROG stuff. So yeah, Asus, of course, spends lots and lots of money on doing a bunch of extreme overclocking, which I'm a fan of, right? I'm a huge fan of extreme overclocking, and I'm really glad that Asus puts as much effort into extreme overclocking as they do. At the same time, as an end user, I would say this is not that relevant to you. And also, I'd like to point out that both MSI and Gigabyte do still do some extreme overclocking. It's just that not anywhere near the extent that like Asus does. High Cookie from Gigabyte recently posted a bunch of like pretty killer scores with a 3900X on LN2. Right, except like Asus, straight up like they send out boards to extreme overclockers, and they support extreme overclocking much more than like MSI or Gigabyte do. But yeah, I wouldn't like, and like it is like, as you know, I'm a fan of extreme overclocking. I'm really glad, like I don't want Asus to stop doing extreme overclocking. Don't get me wrong. It's like the last thing I think we need is more motherboard vendors to stop doing extreme overclocking, right? Because they barely do it anyway. But this is just like this is nice, but ultimately this is more often than not, this is a test of how many CPUs you've binned, more so than how good your motherboard is. So yeah, anyway, let's move on. Next we have digital specs advantage. So here we're looking at the Hero, the Master, and the Ace. Notice how Asus is like, oh, we have 4 rear I/O USB. Wait, man, I've not been keeping up with USB naming schemes. I assume that's just a USB 3.0 port, right? 4 blue ports, 2. Yeah, so that's just a 3.0. I hate USB naming conventions. So okay. So they have 4 on the back, but 2 on they have a single internal header for USB 3.0 is basically what they're getting at. Whereas Gigabyte has 2 internal headers, so 4 for the front and 2 for the back. Right? Like, so in total, all of these boards have the actual same number of USB ports. They're just in different locations. So this is not a win for Asus. What else do we have? They have Type A back, 3, Gen 2. I'm confused what those are, so I'm not going to comment on those. This looks like a win to me, but I might be wrong about that. This is the issue with me not paying that, like, you know, I know 2.0 and 4.0 and 3.0, and what's this? Yeah, it's Type C. Oh, that's what used to be 3.1, isn't it? Wait, they have 7 of those on the back? Oh, I guess they do. Okay, cool. That's a lot. So yeah, I like there's no problem with that. So that's a win for Asus, I guess. And they have more fan headers. MSI with the killer networking. This is something I'm pretty sure I told MSI that I consider Intel the gold standard for networking. So I don't know why they keep using killer. But anyway, Gigabyte and Asus are tied for networking solutions, voltage regulator wise. So the funny thing is, actually, I should have, well, nah, we're not going to go back to that. It's a minor point, but actually, no, we shall. So, you know how they're like 12 power stages? Technically speaking, Gigabyte has 12 phases, not 12 power stages, because a power stage is that's a power stage. It's a chip that integrates your driver and your high side MOSFET and your low side MOSFET. It's not 3 separate MOSFETs and a driver. Okay, what Gigabyte has is 12 phases made up of three MOSFETs and a driver, whereas Asus has 4 phases for vCore and 2 phases for SoC, with 12 power stages in total, where it's 8 power stages for vCore and 4 power stages for SoC. So this is just like the thing is, this is just a like this is honestly like making motherboards, like when boards get designed, there's sort of 2 aspects to motherboard design. One aspect is obviously just making the best board you can, but you also need to make a motherboard that's actually marketable. And that is a real problem, because the general, like, most consumers will assume that if you just have more phases, your motherboard is better. Okay, but the thing is from a certain phase count up, you get diminishing returns in terms of basically everything. So, like, and this is actually like a suggestion I threw out to Gigabyte when I was in Taiwan, was like, you have a really, really great 6-phase on the ITX board. In my opinion, you should just take that VRM and stick it on your ATX boards. Like, tweak it a bit and stick it onto the ATX boards instead of, like, messing around with, like, a 12-phase. And the response I got from Gigabyte was like, well, but how do you market a 6-phase? Right? Like, that's actually really hard. And it was like, well, point. Point taken. It's really hard to market a 6-phase to consumers who just assume that bigger number is better number. But yeah, so that you know, that's just kind of what we're stuck with, and that's why this slide is such a massive mess, because Asus is like, well, we can't call our stuff phases because we don't have those. They have a bunch of power stages, but not a bunch of phases. Gigabyte has a bunch of phases, but no power stages because those are discrete MOSFETs, and MSI also has a bunch of phases, but no power stages because those are discrete MOSFETs. So, yeah. Also, the distinction between discrete MOS and DR MOS is like, well, technically, if you spend enough on discrete MOSFETs, you can get pretty close to the same efficiency as DR MOS. If you, like, go, like, it's hard. There's a reason why power stages are so popular. Like, if you're buying discrete MOSFETs, which can match direct MOS, driver MOS, power, like, driver MOS in terms of performance, the cost is basically the same, which is why you'll just buy a power stage instead of a bunch of discrete MOSFETs, right? So anyway, because you need to buy some like insanely high-end discrete MOSFETs to get that. Anyway, where was I? So extreme overclocking, we were here. So yeah, so this slide is all nice and misleading as usual. Also, worth noting about the SATA ports, notice how they don't talk about M.2 because obviously M.2 slots, MSI and Gigabyte win that. But Gigabyte, I think, has the best balanced I/O configuration because they give you 6 SATA ports. And the thing is, you lose SATA ports as you add M.2 devices with the X570 chipset. So Asus has 8 SATA ports, but if you actually use 2 M.2 slots, you only get 6. On Gigabyte, you have 6 SATA ports, but if you use all M.2 slots, you only get 4. And on MSI, you only have 4, and if you use all M.2 slots, you still have 4. Because MSI basically has the 4 SATA ports that are always present available. But overall, I'd still say it would be better if MSI went with a configuration like Gigabyte, where you get, like, because not everybody's going to want 3 M.2 devices. They might want 2 M.2 devices and then 6 SATA or something like that, right? So I think Gigabyte's configuration is better just because it's more flexible. Asus is like more SATA, less M.2. And I don't know. I feel like X570 owners would prefer more M.2 and less SATA. So I think Gigabyte kind of hits the sweet spot here, though. I think they still could have maybe gone for the extra, 8th SATA port, because 8 SATA ports as well, but still. MSI having 4 SATA ports, in my opinion, is actually straight up bad. And also, it's worth noting that MSI's M.2 slots aren't like, Gigabyte has 2 full length, Asus has 2 full length, but MSI has only 1 full length. So that's kind of another thing to consider there, I think. So yeah, honestly, this price range, I think, is really pick your poison. If you like MSI BIOS or just, well, I guess one thing worth noting is MSI does have the heat pipe for the chipset, so their chipset might run passive for longer, maybe. I'm not sure. That's something somebody would have to test, whereas Asus actually has a really substantial spin stack in their chipset heatsink, so that fan shouldn't have to spin up too hard. And then Gigabyte's chipset cooling actually, I think, might be the worst here, but yeah, I don't know. Like, that's something you'd have to actually test. Anyway, let's move on from this slide. So yeah, Asus is all about how their rear I/O is great, but Intel, the networking is the same for Asus and Gigabyte. So yeah, actually, does MSI have a killer 2.5G? Oh, it's both killer, I guess. No Intel. That sucks. Okay, well, what else do we have? Oh yeah, total design, and then we've got like formula, extreme, godlike. So, fun fact, the extreme and the formula are tied for voltage regulation. Like, they're just tied. So Asus doesn't win this. This teamed power thing, it's actually kind of funny. If you max out the LLC on the formula and the extreme. The extreme actually has better transient response than the formula does. Now, at lower LLC levels, it actually switches, where the formula does slightly better than the extreme does. It's like 10 millivolts difference between the two of them. Or 20, something like that. It's like a really small difference for a really like massive, like the transient. So ultimately, like this is just like, these are tied. Okay. If you're choosing a formula or an extreme based on the VRM, they're tied. Either of them works fine. And I'd argue you should get the extreme because the extreme is just a better featured board compared to the formula in general. You get things like 10 gig LAN. You get things like a passive chipset. You get things like, what else was there? You get dual BIOS. You get, one more thing I'm forgetting. Well, there's the 10G LAN. You get dual BIOS. Actually, Asus might have dual BIOS as well. Or maybe not. I'm not sure. But, like... Oh yeah, you get more M.2 slots again, which is always fun. You get more. You get the same M.2 configuration as the master, whereas the formula is basically a overpriced version of the hero, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I would take the extreme over a formula, any day of the week, because VRM wise they are completely tied. Like I've tested this, and actually the extreme puts less load onto the. Well, the extreme puts less puts out less 12-volt ripple as well. So it's just kind of like transient response-wise, you can't tell them apart, and one of them has a slight advantage in 12-volt. Well, actually, either of them has a slight advantage in either direction. Like, they're tied. Honestly, they're just tied as far as I'm concerned. The formula just, in my opinion, for the price and the feature set, sucks compared to the extreme. The Godlike, I've already said in past videos, I think the Godlike is just generally a silly motherboard. It's like MSI basically seems to have run out of ideas of things they want to do with a board, and that's how the Godlike came to be, because they just kind of threw everything together, and it's just like, well, here's the Godlike. It costs $700, and nobody's really quite sure what it's supposed to do. So, yeah, that's why I don't like the Godlike. But between the formula and the extreme, I'll just take the extreme. So at $700, just buy the extreme. Is my like seriously, just buy the extreme. If anybody, though, the one upside to the Godlike is the PCIe slot configuration. Like, that is actually a potentially quite interesting feature for some people. Though it is worth noting that X570 is still limited to only 16 plus 4 PCIe slots total. So the best configuration you can run on a Godlike, if you max out all the PCIe slots on the Godlike, you're going to get 8444. Whereas the Aorus Extreme and the Formula are 884 if you use all the PCIe X16 slots. So, yeah, anyway, then we have a comparison between the Hero and the Master, and VRM-wise, the Master loses to the Hero because Gigabyte's on 50 amp power stages, whereas Asus is on 60s. Asus has 14 of them, Gigabyte has 12. Voltage regulation-wise, the Master should be almost, like, I didn't get to test the Master, but it shouldn't be much worse than the Extreme. If anything, it should be identical to the Extreme. And so it should be tied with the Hero because the Hero uses the same VRM as the Formula. So these VRM, like regulation-wise, these should all be tied up basically. But the Master has a thermal disadvantage over the other two. Anyway, next we get some temperature comparisons. I don't trust Asus to do thermal testing at all. Also, we actually did thermal testing of the Formula against the Extreme at Gigabyte. There is, I think the Formula slightly wins VRM thermals, but it's not by 5 degrees. It's by like 2 or 3. So again, I just like similar to the, like honestly, some of the the thermal results Asus is getting for their competitors' boards seem suspiciously bad most of the time. Now here, I think that these are probably as close to reality as we're going to get, but yeah, I wouldn't take Asus's word for it. Margin of error for marketing department thermals, I'll say, is plus minus 10 degrees there, because they'll, like, honestly, I don't trust these results. So yeah, but the Formula is slightly cooler. At the same time, it's just like, it's also like, here's the thing: even if these results were all real and like true, none of these is running hot enough for this to be a concern. So I wouldn't buy the motherboard based on VRM thermals anyways. Like 72 degrees versus 67 degrees or 75 degrees, not a relevant difference for a voltage regulator. I wonder if, wait, how long did they test for? Because that's the other thing they could have done. Because I think the heatsink on the formula is really like, it's really heavy, but it doesn't have a lot of surface area. So it's one of those heatsinks that's basically really good at delaying the inevitable. So the longer you run it for, like, they don't mention how long they test, which is kind of annoying. If they tested for like honestly, some of these VRMs you'd probably have to test for over an hour before you got a stable temperature. Oh wait, we tested the extreme with a 39 with actually I think more voltage than that. And we were ending up at like 69 degrees or something with Gigabyte. So, yeah, I don't know what Asus is doing. This, again, just seems a bit high for the thermal testing that they're doing. But anyway, so, yeah, don't take marketing department's words for thermal testing. But it's not like, yeah, like, this is probably just, and still, the temperature differences here are irrelevant. Anyway, next we get this. Again, I have no idea how they got the master to 93 degrees. I have no idea how they got that temperature. But what I do know is that the master does run hotter than the hero, because the hero's VRM is the same VRM that you get on the formula. So, yeah, it's just like the master should lose, but I'm not sure that it should lose by this much. Okay, like this to me is suspect. That seems way too high for that VRM. Though, unfortunately, I don't remember the test results for the master. I didn't test it. So, whereas I was there when we were testing the extreme. I very distinctly remember that board never going over 70 degrees. And it wasn't like we were taking it lightly with the... We were hitting it with a light load. So, yeah. Anyway, what else do we have? Power design matters. VRM comparison without heat sinks. Yeah, so better than the Ultra. Like, the Ultra is on the same VRM as the Pro. So the Strix X570-E winning this is just like, well, that's a given. And this is not a fair comparison against MSI, because MSI's Gaming Pro Carbon is a $250 board, whereas the Strix E is like a $330 board. So there's a $70 price gap between the Strix E and the Carbon. This is not a fair comparison whatsoever. Like, they shouldn't, like, MSI doesn't have a $300 board, so I get why they compared against this, but it's just like, no. Does MSI have it? I don't think MSI has a $300 board. Oh, wait. I'm pretty sure this is $250. Yeah, no, like, that's not a fair comparison. This board's way too expensive. They should, like... Also, it's funny that there's no ASRock boards anywhere here, because feature-wise, ASRock tends to be really, really competitive. But yeah, as for the Ultra, I don't think I don't consider these results wrong. Because the Ultra's VRM is significantly weaker than the Strix E's. So yeah, anyway, moving on. Here we have Asus talking about how great their heatsink is again for no, like, here's the thing. You're comparing different voltage regulators. You can't talk about that, like, you can't say this heatsink is better than this other heatsink if you're not using the same heat load. So this slide is irrelevant. It would have been good enough, like, they honestly should have, like, they shouldn't talk about the heatsink design at all, as far as I'm concerned. They should just go, we have better VRM temperatures. How we got there doesn't really matter, because ultimately, I don't think... I'm pretty sure Gigabyte's heatsink is actually better than Asus's heatsink. But... Asus has a significantly more efficient VRM, so their inferior heatsink ends up with better temperatures because it has to deal with less heat. Amazing how that works, doesn't it? So yeah, honestly, it should just be like, our VRM runs cooler. Why does it run cooler is completely irrelevant, right? Like, the heatsink I consider a integral part of the VRM, because most end users will not remove the heatsink. Actually, I'd say 99.9999999% of end users will not run the board without the VRM heatsink. So an irrelevant comparison, like, pointless. You should just the stupid slide shouldn't exist. Power design matters. What do we have now from Asus? Dash F versus the Pro. Fair. So the funny thing is, though... Okay, actually, I'm not going to, like... I still don't trust Asus thermals. Like, Asus thermal measurement methodology. Still don't trust them on that. Wait, what is that? 3,689? For a stock CPU on small FFTs? Seems a tad too high. But yeah, I still don't, well, basically, I still don't trust Asus thermal testing. The funny thing is, well, I can't actually talk, well, there's something I want to talk about, but it's actually not in my best interest to talk about it because, yeah. Anyway, like, Gigabyte has stuff to do with their voltage regulator designs. Let's just put it that way. Because, well, I'm not going to get into it. But yeah, so Dash F, sure. Like, yeah, sure. Because these are technically 50 amp power stages against 40 amp power stages. The thing is, it's just like, well, I'm not gonna get into it. Like, I really, like, I want to get this video. Like, I've actually shot multiple takes of this video because every previous takes I'd say something which is like, not like I'm not supposed to be talking about. So, or well, it's not that it's not like I signed an ADA about it. It's just like it's not a good idea to talk about for me. So anyway, yeah, Asus, our VRM runs cooler. When you put a heatsink on a VRM that already runs cooler, it runs cooler. It still runs cooler. Who would have thought, right? Though it's interesting to note that Gigabyte's heatsink seems to be making a much bigger difference to the VRM operating temperature than Asus is. But that's also because, at lower temperatures, heat dissipation is harder to do. So you need a disproportionately larger heatsink to make a difference. Like going from 60 to 50 degrees in a 25-degree ambient room is significantly more difficult than going from 90 degrees to 80 degrees in a 25-degree ambient room. So yeah, like that's also worth keeping in mind. But ultimately, again, Asus should have just gone, our VRM is better, not talk about the heat sinks whatsoever, because you can't talk about, you can't compare heat sinks with different heat loads. And we know there's different heat loads from this right here. Anyway, let's keep going down. So next we have OC stability. I can't actually talk about this page either for reasons that I can't get into. So we'll move on. So what do we have here? You get what you pay for. ProCool 2. Okay, so you have a useless extra 4-pin power connector. Great. BIOS flashback. G-brand. Nope. Gigabyte has BIOS flashback on every single one of their motherboards. From the Extreme to the Gaming X, you get BIOS flashback. So that's a lie, Asus. Okay? That's a lie. It's not on the rear I/O. It's somewhere else on the board. But they have BIOS flashback on every single X570 motherboard. So you're just lying about that. 9 times USB 3.2 Gen. I'm not gonna get into that because I'm just not gonna get into that part. I'd need to look up the specs for the other boards to tell you if they're lying about that. No Q. Yeah, postcodes. Fair point. 6-layer PCB. That's a lie. As far as I know, both MSI and Gigabyte are using 6-layer PCBs because that's the only way you can get that extra PCIe slot to work. Right? That's the thing. If you have a motherboard with 2 PCIe 4.0 CPU slots, so the 16X and the 8X, and then the last slot is chipset, all of the boards that have 2 PCIe slots like this, as far as I know, are 6 layers. Because I don't think there's a single 4-layer board with 2 with 2 CPU PCIe slots, because you can't, the signal integrity on a 4-layer doesn't work out. So anyway, so that's also just a straight up lie. M brand has only 1 XPCIe. This is a E. This is a 330. Oh yeah, they're still comparing against the Gaming Pro Carbon, which is a $250 board. And this is a $330 board. So that comparison right there is invalid. Also, SLI's bloody dead. Nobody cares. SLI is almost dead and Crossfire is dead. So who cares, right? Who cares? Anyway, 16 power stages. Gigabyte only has 14 and MSI has only 12. Putting extra power stages into the SoC VRM functionally doesn't make the VRM any better. It just makes the board cost more money. Because, who cares? The thing is, this board is a 6+2 phase, and they have 4 power stages in the SoC VRM. So, yes, in total, they do have 16. It's just that 2 of those power stages are powering a portion of your CPU that couldn't care less about having 2 more power stages. So yeah, that's kind of a pointless comparison, isn't it? What they could have pointed out is that this is on 60 amp 3555s, whereas Gigabyte is on 40 amp 3553s, and MSI is on dual NFETs, which aren't even power stages. Like those are, but again, that's a $250 board, whereas this is a $330 board. So what a stupid comparison in the first place, right? The cheaper board has a cheaper VRM. How surprising, right? Like, who would have expected that? Heatsink with 8mm heat pipe, regular heatsink, small heat pipe. Just don't talk about heatsinks. Honestly, just don't talk about heatsinks is my thoughts on that. Because I'm sure like their justification for it is like, if you weighed our heatsink is heavier than Gigabyte's or whatever. And it's just like, just don't talk about heatsinks, okay? Like, it's not like there's a standardized voltage regulator heatsink test platform, so it's irrelevant. As far as I'm concerned, if the VRM runs cooler, how it achieves that cooler running operation is kind of irrelevant. If it does it through more expensive power stages, great. If it does it through a better heatsink, great. End result is that it runs cooler. That's the only part that really matters, as far as I'm concerned, at least. So just don't talk about heatsinks. Better for everybody, I'd say. Because, like, you can't compare them in the first place, so it's a pointless comparison. Like, well, you can't compare them properly. You can't do a proper, scientific test of Gigabyte's heatsink is better or Asus's heatsink is better. You can't do that. So you shouldn't talk about it, because it's a pointless freaking comparison to make. Anyway, next, what do we get? F. Okay. No, Gigabyte's Pro has 6 layers. This is a $300 board or a $250. Like, I don't know how much, I can't remember. This goes up against the Gigabyte Pro, and the Pro is 6 layers. So this is, again, just lying. Yeah, they're comparing against the Pro, aren't they? Stupid freaking slides. Yeah, they're comparing against the Pro, I assume. That looks like the Pro. So, yeah, that's a 6-layer board. So that's wrong. The Pro also has a better rear I/O, because the rear I/O, funnily enough, the Elite also has a really beast rear I/O, because the rear I/O for the Gigabyte boards basically doesn't change from the Elite all the way up to, like, the Master. You get the same pretty much the same rear I/O for all of those. But, yeah, so... oh, yeah, we have BIOS flashback. Oh, Gigabyte didn't... Wait a minute. I'm pretty sure I just pointed out that you were lying about that already. Like, Gigabyte has BIOS flashback on every single X570 board, so that apparently needs to be restated. G-Brand didn't equip with op-amps. I don't do audio sections, so I'll just ignore that. 8 SATA ports, fair. Actually, yeah, this is a fair point, because Gigabyte does also have only 2 M.2 slots, so sure. Okay, you can point out that you have more SATA ports here. Flex key and node connectors. Aren't those like Asus proprietary connectors? Of course Gigabyte doesn't have them. How could Gigabyte have Asus connectors? Like, whatever. M.2 fan header. The hell is that? Is like, oh, this is a fan header that's close to... I have no idea what that is. Oh, and they have a silly M.2 fan header down here as well. You gotta love the kind of crap marketing departments get paid to make up, like somebody got paid for making up this shit right here. That's hard to think about. Like, oh my God. And somebody's going to fall for it. That's probably the worst part, right? Somebody falling for all of the crap that Asus, these got taken down. Well, no, because now they're on video cards. So, yeah, it's like somebody's probably going to fall for this crap. And somebody got paid for making all of this crap up. And all of the lying. Can't forget about all of the lies, like the Gigabyte having a 4-layer, it's a 6, or Gigabyte not having BIOS flashback. When Gigabyte has BIOS flashback on more boards than Asus has BIOS flashback on. And also, I'm pretty sure the X570-F is a $300 board, whereas the Dash Pro is a $250 board. So this is another unfair comparison because this board is $50 more expensive than the board that Asus is comparing. Oh, I get why they're doing that, because you get what you pay for. Lies. That's what you get. You get lies. You fund Asus's overfund. You put more money into the already overfunded Asus marketing department so that they can come up with more BS marketing slides. There, I think at this point, like, and the funny thing is, I do consider a lot of the Asus boards really good boards, but this right here is just like awful. Oh wait, it goes on. There's more. Oh no, we're back at the top, aren't we? Oh yeah, it loops back. Of course it loops back because modern website design. Um, yeah, no, but like the thing is, like the Tough Gaming Plus, in my opinion, is a legitimately good board, and so is the Hero. But like, especially like down here, it's really bad. Like this is just like really, really bad. These two slides are just god awful. Um, the thermal testing, like board vendors should not like put like they should not do this kind of like they shouldn't put these kinds of thermal camera shots into their marketing slides because like the thing is just like if you like because no like as I said I've had experience with this where it's just like like they test in ways that inherent like they always figure out a way to make the rig the test such that you can't necessarily say it's wrong but it is unrealistic where it's like oh our board wins for some ungodly weird test condition reason. So thermal camera images from board vendors unless they're comparing their own products are completely useless. If they're comparing against their competitors, ignore anything they say about temperatures because it's probably wrong for all kinds of reasons. And yeah, this right here, like honestly, like I think it's in Asus's own interest that these slides never went up because like for this they should just like yeah, like at this point I'm like at this point it's just like some of these are just like they're just lying on some of these where it's just like so this is like when you buy an Asus motherboard obviously you pay for the production cost of the board but you also fund the Asus marketing department, so you fund all of this crap that they come up with, like you pay for this. I don't want to be paying for this. Like I want to have nothing to do with any of this. Like, this is kind of like why I don't buy NVIDIA, right? It's just like NVIDIA might make some really, really nice GPUs, but NVIDIA as a company, I don't want to really have much to do with. So, for like NVIDIA's marketing, I wouldn't say is as bad. It's like I have other issues with NVIDIA, but Asus marketing, like, this is bad. Like this is just really, really bad. And like the thermal comparisons, like okay, I could forget that. I'm assuming they're rigging them because some of these temperatures look absolutely insane. Even from like my own testing experience. So yeah. So I assume they're rigging the thermal testing, but if we ignore that, like you can't ignore shit like this and that. Like, yeah. Or of course, we can't forget about, hey, technically we have the same number of these USB ports. It's just ours are in the rear IO, so that's why we're highlighting them. Or where was it? There was one other where it was like, which one was it? Oh yeah, this one where it's like, oh, technically we have worse M.2 expansion support, but like we're not gonna point it out, of course. They are correct about the layer count down here, though I'm not sure that they're correct about the MSI board because I'm pretty sure MSI is also all 6 layers. Though I'm like I need to check that, but I think MSI is all of their motherboards are 6 layers as well, which might explain the memory clock disparity between like, Asus, MSI, and Gigabyte here. But yeah, like ultimately a lot of this is just like some of it's misleading and then some of it's just lies. And yeah, so the thing is like ultimately I think anybody who would have actually read these slides would have probably fallen for it. Which is like that's the sad part. Like a lot of people, they'd read this stuff and they'd fall for it, which is obviously why somebody got paid to make all of this garbage. So, yeah, that's kind of like, the funny thing is in my previous takes, I never got to the last two slides. So I never realized just how bad it gets when you get to the bottom. And it gets really bad. Oh man. CPU core temp high due to no, it's a 6. CPU throttling due to Wait, so they're saying the CPU overheated? Oh, so that's a completely different issue. Oh, man. Oh, boy. See, I thought their 3.8 gigahertz limit here was for a completely different reason. Okay, no. So this right here, okay, that's just their no CPU throttling. Yeah, okay, their cooling configuration, like CPU throttling or CPU core temp high due to 4P. Yeah, no, that's not a thing. Also, that engineering sample CPU, that 16-core ES CPU, has a TJ max of 125 degrees. It doesn't thermal throttle at all. Like I've like, I was really like when I was testing that CPU at Gigabyte, we were running that chip regularly at like 110 degrees because, we were testing voltage regulators, and the way we were testing them was basically just jam as much power as we could just about cool and roll with it. And, since the TJ Max is 125, just about cool equals 110. So yeah, I'm not sure how they got it to thermal throttle on that board because we had no issues with doing some pretty. So yeah, this right here is just wrong, as far as I'm concerned. Default. Do you mean default? Oh, because yeah, no, but it's an engineering sample chip. Yeah, so this slide should also just not exist. I don't know why they tested with the 16 core. Oh, I know why they tested with the 16 core. The 12 core doesn't pull enough power to make their VRM look good enough. Right, of course. I forgot. how very dumb of me. So yeah. This is all just a pile of garbage. Just so much garbage. Man, somebody spent time doing all of these thermal tests. Actually, what's worse is probably somebody spent time figuring out how to rig the test conditions such that they can make themselves look much, much better. Right? Like, because of course that's what you do. Wait a minute. 16 core, 3.1 gigahertz. Anyway. So, yeah, that's kind of that. I gotta say, I honestly, like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. Asus, maybe instead of spending money on making crap, making up crap about your competitors, you should just make better boards or cheaper boards. Maybe you could cut back on the marketing budget. Instead of spending money on all of this crap, you can make the boards cheaper. Yeah, I'm really disappointed to see this kind of thing. Because it's like they already had good enough boards. Like, the Tough Gaming is a perfectly good motherboard. It doesn't need a bunch of useless marketing wank like this. And so is the Hero. The Hero is a perfectly good motherboard. The Formula isn't. The Formula is a really overpriced version of the Hero. So yes, that one needs, a marketing department rescue operation. But Like, this just, like, I was considering buying Asus boards because I obviously don't get sent review samples by them. I guess I'm just not buying them then. Because similar reasoning is why I don't generally buy modern NVIDIA GPUs. I mean, why would I buy motherboards for if, this is what you do with the money that I pay for them? Like, awful. Absolutely awful. So, fun fact, there's going to be a X570 Elite Wi-Fi. So, if you want Wi-Fi and you don't want to, you want a roughly $200 board, you want Wi-Fi, and you don't want to buy it from Asus, you can get you just have to wait for Gigabyte to release the Wi-Fi version of the Elite. That's going to be your best option. It's probably going to be a bit more expensive than the tough gaming Wi-Fi, but it also gives you a better rear I/O, and it also gives you Intel networking for the LAN instead of Realtek, which I think is a good enough reason to pay a little extra. So anyway, yeah. Also, there's no option for the Dash P. Like, there's no alternative to the Dash P as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, if you're not buying a 16 core, this has BIOS flashback, better M.2 slots, that kind of thing. So, ugh. Like, ugh. So, okay. I think at this point I've done enough, rethinking the garbage that Asus came up with here. And I guess we can wrap up this video. So I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. And leave... oh yeah, if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, which from now on includes not buying Asus motherboards. Not new ones anyway. I'll buy second-hand ones, right? That's fine, because not paying Asus. But yeah, so... yeah, if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. I have Teespring. You can, Patreon if you want to support me directly. And if you want to buy like shirts, stickers, posters, socks, that kind of thing, you can use the Teespring. There's links to both down in the description below. They do help out with running the channel immensely. And yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching and goodbye.